Welcome to Workshop 1, Episode 4. We're going to be reviewing thought patterns and rabbit holes. We have about 10 slides we need to work through, and they're important so that we can get to the next episode, which will train our brains how to think differently and the discipline that's required there. So, we're going to move as quickly as we can through this. So the top of the thought is what we're interested in here. In the thought work, we must learn to be able to identify the thought at the beginning, the very microsecond that that thought comes to our conscious mind. And we need to catch it the instant it brings sorrow or pain of any kind or intensity. And we know when that happens because when a negative thought or a loving thought comes, it brings with it a feeling. We always know which thoughts we're going to keep and which ones we want to redirect. We do not want to allow the negative thought to follow that trek down to the rabbit hole because when that happens, we're stuck there. The thought has processed itself on the same path that it has done hundreds and hundreds of times. And it puts us into that same anxiety or depression or anxiety or anger or self-pity or blame rabbit hole. And we have to climb out of that rabbit hole. And that's where the discouragement comes in when we're dealing with mental illness and things that are very difficult in our lives, betrayal trauma, because we allow our brains to go to the rabbit hole. Now, we only allow that when we know that that's where we're going. We allow it when we're not taught the discipline of not allowing it. And it's a beautiful thing to see in the lives of addicts or betrayed women or depressed women when they realize that there's power here. We can change the direction of a negative thought and change the way therein that our cells and our bodies are being treated. And the whole being changes when we disallow the darkness and allow the light. And that is one of the biggest struggles that we have in any sorrow. I don't know how to make my brain do that. I don't know how to change this. And we would if we knew how, because no one wants to be down in that awful rabbit hole. So we're this is a slide that is really important because this is the view of where we're not going, and it will help us to go a different direction. Please take a screenshot of this slide so that you'll always have it on hand because this is our practice screen. This is the sheet that helps us with everything that we have recorded so far. If you've been listening to the podcasts, then you have a list of things that will help in this particular exercise of identifying the thoughts and your experiences because we have pre-thought bucket database and conscious thought that we're going to uh, look at because you've written them down before. You've written down the things that bother you. You've written down maybe the rabbit holes that you've experienced. So we're going to take this one thing at a time and we're going to practice this and we're going to see how we will forever be using this. And when you get very good at this, then this is automatic. The brain remembers these things. The brain knows exactly what to do next, especially after it's been trained a bit. And it doesn't take long for the brain to respond to that. So if we look at the experiences and the interpretation of the experience, now we talked a lot about that pre-thought bucket and the things that are there that may or may not be completely true or handled or interpreted differently. So we also have this paradigm that we live with, that we've built through our lives, and this box is where we would put what we think our paradigm is. What is charging everything that we do in our brains? This paradigm is our place in the world, and I don't think it's a conscious decision that we ever really think about until someone says, well, what is your paradigm? How do you see the world? How do you see your place in it? How much light is in there? What's really there? And then there's also the current bothersome thought, which our brains are always active unless we're unconscious. But it's important to know that when the conscious thought comes forward in our minds, it brings with it a feeling. And right there, we know, right there in that box, my current bothersome thought, we care about the negative thought and redirecting it. Now, when it's a positive thought, we want to just absorb it. It's already light filled, unless our database is full of negative and we revert to the negative blame or self pity. And we'll even put our beautiful thoughts through that sieve and end up with some sorrow. So we are going to retrain how this all happens. And then we have, of course, the shadow filter. Where do we usually go with that bothersome thought? What kind of rabbit hole? And most women know what it is. If we have a propensity towards depression, that's where we're going. And that's our brain's favorite place. And it's only favorite because it doesn't know that there's a way to do different. That the brain can know that that does not have to be the rabbit hole that we're going to. It can be this one over here. My new practice thought. What have I decided I'm going to do with that new thought? And we're going to record there the reject and replaced dialogue that I'm going to teach you in the next episode. So this is the basic, and it's absolutely vital that we memorize it, we get it out and look at it. If we can feel ourselves headed down a negative rabbit hole because all day long we've been entertaining negative thoughts in the old negative way, we're going to change that. We're going to recognize it and do something different. It's a glorious thing. This is the anxiety path for a thought. And we're going to look at this and how this is actually developed. And so we'll have an explanation of how these things happen. We're going to practice anxiety and probably, I think the other one is the depression. And we're just going to need to know these things. So, in the pre thought bucket, there is my experience with anxiety, my interpretations of those anxiety, and my anxiety attacks. And so that's there. And when something happens, then I get in trouble. I live in fear of another debilitating attack. I can't function. I hate my life. So that's a filter we look at every day with everything that happens to us and every thought that comes to us. And so we are functioning under a debilitating attitude of anxiety, and it's built there. It is firm and it can be destructive, but we are going to take another way of looking at it. So when a conscious thought comes to that anxiety driven mind, such as that assignment is impossible, I can't get it right. I'm so upset. God does not hear my prayer. So something happens to trigger the thought to come. So an assignment was made, and it's debilitating, and we can't go through with it. And so we are stuck there. What are we going to do with that thought? And with that very thought comes the feeling. Now it even says it. I'm so upset. So there's an anxious upset going on in the whole body, and we're frustrated, we're mad at God or frustrated with God because he doesn't hear our prayers supposedly. And so that is a dark thought, but it's only dark because we don't know that we have another choice. And we haven't learned about databases or pre-thought buckets before. And so now we're going to look at a different way of doing this. But so for this point, we are now going to let it follow what it always does, and it will always follow down the rabbit hole the instant the thought is there. And it brings an ugly feeling. And we would like to change that direction, but we don't know how to yet. And so what will happen? I can't breathe. I can't think. I'm terrified. Why doesn't God remove this from me? All negative, very hard things. And now we are already in the rabbit hole. And so we need to understand what happens next. Now, remember, it's the database, our view of the world and our place in it, that is so damaging to our whole being. Well, what happens here is when we have that negative response in a thought, I can't breathe, I can't think, I'm terrified, and all those things are happening in the brain. It's pumping darkness into this database. And so what happens to the database? It stays shadow. It stays in the shadow. It can't do anything different. And so we reinforce the negative, the fears, the anxiety, all of it gets reinforced because we have allowed that thought to go into the anxiety rabbit hole. Now we're going to take another look at this same situation. We're going to see the experience is the same, the database is the same. Like, I hate my life, it's still dark. And then we have the conscious thought, same conscious thought. And if we let it go where it always goes, it ends up in the anxiety rabbit hole. But this time, we're going to redirect the thought. We're going to understand that there's a new way to do this. Now, this isn't the discipline or the thought work part. I'm trying to help you understand that there is a process here so that when we get to the next episode, we're going to see that there is a discipline of the brain that is required in order for us to do something different. We're not going to go down that shadow filter rabbit hole. We're going to do something different, and we're going to do the light filter. We're going to change at the top of the thought the direction of the thought, because the instant we feel it, that's the top of the thought. And then we are going to change the direction of that thought to and through the light filter. I am not afraid. I can breathe slower. I am safe. Christ walks with me always. I will ask for help. These little sentences of power are chosen by us individually, the things that we feel most comfortable with. And in the discipline, they become a power. It's a sword we weld against the dark side, and they are powerful. And then what happens? The same awful thought that was taking us to the rabbit hole is now sent through the light filter because we've trained our minds to do that. And now Do you see how the light can be transferred because of the faith work of that thought? We're actually trusting Christ, trusting the light, trusting the gods, and that light is actually changing and adding light to the database. So I can change the debilitating, fearful database that I have unwittingly grown through my life, and I can do something different and light filled for every cell in my body. It is a glorious thing, and I'm going to show you those things in detail so that you understand the power that's already in your female mind. The magnificence is already there to do these things. We just have to believe it, have faith in it, and trust it. This slide, the next two slides are going to deal with depression, and I'm going to move really quickly through them because I don't want to go over time. But look at what happens in the depression pre-thought bucket. My experience with loss and grief and my interpretations of those sad experiences. Remember, they're in there. And then when something happens and we have to put a thought through the database, what does the database look like? I'm devastated by grief, pain, or addiction. I feel paralyzed. I am unable to function at all. So we can spend 3 days in that rabbit hole, or we can spend 3 years. And the only reason we stay there is because we haven't figured out how to get out or how to stop from going in the first place. So this one, the conscious thought is, I can't take that phone call. I have failed in every way today. I felt that for a year when I was clinically depressed and in complete darkness, and I had lost the ability to function at all in any area of my life. And I felt like a complete failure, and I had no tools with which to come out of it. And so this is heart-wrenching for anyone in this situation. So what would we do with it? In the shadow filter, I feel so sad. God does not hear my prayers. No one cares, including me. If you have this experience in your life, you know how that feels. And you know how debilitating it can be. So we need to understand that there is another way to deal with those depressive thoughts that have channeled themselves from the top of the thought down to the rabbit hole many, many hundreds and thousands of times. And now we're going to need to change those ruts. We're going to change them. So here's the same scenario, same pre-thought bucket, same database, same conscious thought, but this time we're going to choose a different path for that thought. We're going to actually use the faith filter. We're going to bring light. And one would think that would be very difficult to do, but in reality it isn't. It's a discipline and a learned skill. You can learn to play the piano, you can learn to play the flute, you can learn to dance, but you can also learn to train your body and your mind to respond to the light because now you're paying attention to it where previously we didn't know. So I know God loves me. I will think forward thoughts. Depression usually lives in the past sorrows. I'm going to think about my future. I will seek help. All light-filled, positive, faith-motivated thoughts. And this is where, of course, we get the influence of the light. We get to see how the light works. It moves from our thought, our faith-filled action thought, and moves it into the database where we now are impressed And after a period of time, and it doesn't take very long, the database becomes lighter and we wake up in the morning feeling better. And we'll find out that our brains actually moved that thought into the light filled area of the faith filter, and on its own, because it's training itself. It is a remarkable gift from the gods when we start to exercise our minds into the faith area of light. And then every single cell in our body responds, and we are different beings when we can grasp the power of this. This is the last slide of this episode, but I wanted to bring to your mind, this is the same kind of a issue. It's just a little different diagram. And it is one of from fear. I live in fear of another debilitating attack. I can't function. I hate my life. So we're talking about fear and anxiety. Well, what we're really looking at here is this spot right here, this thought choice spot. When we can understand that that is where our agency lies, we have thought choice because God has given us agency. We have the choice to choose light or shadow. And we do that a gazillion times a day when we're processing our thoughts. But when we're conscious of it and we're actually using our thinking mind to use these faith powers of thought, it's a remarkable thing. And so what happens? We are now able to see that we're right in the middle of making a thought choice, and it's pleasant. It's not an effort because we've trained our brains to do it. I am not afraid. I can breathe slower. I am safe. God walks with me always. I will ask for help. There's nothing more light building than something like this, because we are now trusting Christ in this process. We believe that He will help us change our debilitated minds that have been struggling perhaps for decades with depression or addiction or anxiety or any other mental sorrow. We have the power in us to do that, even if it's just a little piece a day, even if it is just a small amount of faith we are operating under. It doesn't matter. The Lord will help us do this much, and then He'll help us do a little bit more, and then He'll help us do a little bit more. And I'm not saying this is a magic wand. I am saying that this is a discipline that helps in every issue of our female magnificence. And I know these things, and I hope that you will come back and see the next episode where I'm going to teach you the very discipline of these steps and watch glory power happen. So come back and see me. This is Michelle Noel.